now joined by Leslie Maasdorp, who is currently the Chief Financial Officer of the New Development Bank. Thank you very much for joining us. My first question would be, in the current financial institutions that emerged, the New Development Bank as well as the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, the United States is not a member. Does this actually signal a new era for international financial institutions?
So many of the big multilateral banks like the World Bank, the IMF, they were all established just after the Second World War. At that time, the US was by far the dominant economy and the biggest political player in the world. Western Europe was also a significant player politically and economically. So as a result, these institutions have been controlled historically and still to this day by a combination of the US and Western Europe. Over the last 20, 30, 35 years or so, as you know, China has become a significant player in global affairs. China is now the second biggest economy, and many of the other economies, India, Brazil, and so on, these nations have grown over the last couple of decades. The current global economic or the governance arrangements in these institutions do not reflect the new balance of forces, if you like. So these new institutions is creating a bigger voice for emerging markets. So these institutions, the way we see it, they will play a complementary role with the existing institutions and not act as rivals to the existing system.
Okay. So China has begun to invest massively in renewable energies. Do you believe that China will actually lead us to a more sustainable future?
So, as you might know, China has had unprecedented, really phenomenal growth over the last 35 years, right? Just to give you a sense of how enormous this has been, between the year 1300 and 1800, as we heard yesterday from Lord Griffiths, living standards doubled. Between 1800 and 1900, it doubled again, over 100 years. China has doubled living standards every 10 years over a 30-year period. It is quite phenomenal. It's never been done in the history of mankind. The US also took 30 years to double living standards. However, this was done with huge damage to the environment, huge damage to air quality, water quality, soil quality, etc. To the point, and I live in China now so I can experience it myself, where the air quality has reached a stage where should China continue to grow at its current rate, these cities will not be livable in the next couple of decades. So China right now is on a path to have more balanced growth and to move towards towards a green, or to transition the economy towards a more green economy. And China is leading investment in the world in renewable energy, right? Because out of necessity, it has to ensure that it is no longer as dependent as it was on coal as a source of energy.
One last question. What do you actually think can developing countries do better in the process of growth than the now developed world did in their process of growth?
I think firstly, it's often assumed that developed countries are already developed and therefore they're kind of there, and developing countries or emerging markets have to catch up and do what these countries have done. In many respects, China in particular over the last 30 years have copied the business models of the US and other developed countries. That is now changing. The emerging markets are looking at new ways of doing things, leveraging off technology and leapfrogging. In other words, looking at exponentially how could you do things completely in a different way. I'll give you an example. Many people don't have bank accounts in Africa and have never had a telephone line in their homes, but they have mobile phones. And they now also do mobile payments. Many of them have never had a bank account. So they're skipping generations of technology. That's one simple way of how developing countries are plotting a different growth trajectory. So in many respects, the developing countries have the potential to increase productivity significantly and craft new growth models. That potential exists, and I'm very bullish about the long-term potential of emerging markets.
Thank you very much for that short interview.